Hi, and welcome to this edition of Inside Judicial Watch. I'm your host, Jerry Dunleavy, a digital strategist here at Judicial Watch. And today we are going to be discussing the politicized nature and the political questions surrounding the Department of Justice's investigations. Specifically, we're going to be doing a bit of a deep dive on Peter Strzok and Lisa Page and their missing or disappeared text messages, tens of thousands of them. Joining me today is the Director of Investigations here at Judicial Watch, Chris Farrell. So thank you very much for being with me today, sir.
Thanks, Jerry. Great.
So we've just found out that from the time period of December 14th, 2016 through May 17th, 2017, the FBI is telling us that tens of thousands of text messages sent between FBI agents involved in a variety of these different investigations have gone missing.
And you can't even say that without smiling.
I mean, it's hard to say because
it doesn't pass the giggle test. No one believes it.
Well, it's unbelievable in sort of the literal sense of not being able to be
plausible, right?
Believed,
right?
So, Chris, if you could walk me through the involvement of Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, why they're relevant to all of the issues surrounding the Clinton investigation, the Mueller investigation, and why we care about what's going on there at the Department of Justice.
Yeah. Well, the greatest advantage, I think, is that we do have quite a number of Strzok-Page text messages back and forth. And so that's great documentary evidence to start with. And it speaks for itself, right? You get a view, a peek into their thinking, their language, their conduct, what they think is important. And I'm more than ready to take them at their word. You know, I believe that what they write to each other is what they think and what they believe and feel and say. So, okay. It's very clear that there was an active program, an effort, synchronized, a conspiracy, more than one person, to steer the election, to undermine the sort of start of the transition, and then even the early days of the Trump administration. And Strzok is present through all of that. Strzok is part of the Hillary email investigation. Strzok he even opines in his text messages about the value of the Mueller investigation because he says there's no there, meaning that there's no substance, no validity to the entire quest that they're on. So,
right.
The stuff that we have is interesting all by itself. And it just lets you kind of mentally fill in the blanks about what they went ahead and deleted or hid or lost or pick your favorite word.
Right. So let's talk a little bit more about Strzok's involvement in these investigations. Yep. He was a high-ranking member of the FBI, as their number 2 counterintelligence official. So he's not just some FBI agent. This was a guy with a lot of responsibility. Talk with me, if you will, about his involvement in the Clinton email investigation, because I think he was pretty deeply involved in that.
Yeah, basically he was running the show. So not at the sort of senior supervisory level, the executive assistant director level. That's a different animal. But further down in the chain at the actual sort of like team level, who's running the show, he was really the special agent in charge of that operation. And we know that based upon our own sources, people who have interviewed former FBI agents who were active at the time, who confirmed back to us, oh yeah, Strzok was the guy in charge. Some of them have even, some of the less savory of the people that we've talked to have even kind of, I guess lied is a good word. And said, oh, Strzok's running a great job. And clearly he was not running a great job. But so Strzok was the guy in charge of the actual, what they call MYE, or mid-year exam. That's the short name, the nickname for the Clinton email server investigation. His girlfriend is an FBI attorney, not an agent. That's Lisa Page. They're in communication back and forth about all sorts of things. But I think with respect to putting the perspective or giving perspective for the role or importance of Strzok with respect to mid-year exam is that Strzok was the guy conducting the subject interview of Hillary Clinton on the 2nd of July, 2016, on that Saturday. So normally, in any other investigation anywhere by any federal law enforcement officer, someone like Mrs. Clinton, who federal agents have reason to believe had committed a crime, she would have been Mirandized, meaning read her rights. The interview would have been done under oath,
of course,
recorded, either video, audio, or both. There certainly would have been a transcript. A court reporter would have been tucked back in the corner typing away or doing the recording. So all these things would have been documented. Well, none of them were done.
No oath, no Mirandizement, no transcript.
Correct. No record. And there's just an FBI 302 summary report, no verbatim on Q&A back and forth. When Mrs. Clinton claims 39 times in the interview that she doesn't recall something, here's what Mr. Strzok doesn't do. On the 39th time you've told me you don't recall something, or actually probably on the first or second,
right.
I would stop you and say, you do recall that you were briefed on all these sensitive compartment information programs, all these classified things that you had access to. And you go, well, I guess so, or there's some dissembling sort of answer. Well, then you pause and you pull out the non-disclosure agreement that Mrs. Clinton would have executed. In fact, there would have been a few of them. And then you slide them across the table and you ask her and her counsel to refresh their recollection, review the document, identify that, yes, that's your signature at the bottom of the page, ask them to review the paragraph that says, even if you don't remember exactly what you're supposed to do, don't ever reveal these things. There's like a catch-all,
right.
Where even if you make a mistake, you're still wrong. It's one of those kind of, and after she refreshes her recollection and reviews the document, then you go back and ask the question again. So, I mean, if you're serious, that's what you do. If you're having a coffee and donut session with David Kendall, and this is all just a joke because you've already drawn your conclusion back in April or May, well, then you go through the motions like these guys did. The whole thing was phonied up.
And they seem to at least intimate at that in the text messages, right? I believe that there's reference to Lynch,
yep,
and reference to sort of a sarcastic take at her courageous decision to step away because
it was a done deal.
Right.
It was a foregone conclusion. They were just sort of going through the motions. It was ritualized behavior. It was kabuki theater, right? Everyone had their little part to play, and they dramatically did what they thought they were supposed to do in order to sort of fake the public out and give them this false sense of, oh yeah, we're doing the right thing. And parts of it were very well scripted, and parts of it weren't. And what I mean by that is, no one expected Anthony Weiner to be sexting some teenage girl in North Carolina.
Right.
Because that drew attention to his laptop. And once NYPD detectives and New York FBI agents came across what was on Weiner's laptop, besides the weird stuff he was doing with teenage girls, but the Hillary Clinton emails, that's what blew the lid off.
Right.
And they had to go back and kind of phony up, investigation part 2, which naturally they declared was, oh, no problem, right?
Right.
Hillary Clinton's very upset about it. She should really be upset about Huma Abedin and Anthony Weiner contaminating or using their computers to back up their email that never should have been sent in the first place.
Right. An investigation that had been put to bed in July.
Right. Is resurrected because Weiner can't stop, messing around with teenage girls.
And then they had to put it to bed again a few days later.
Right.
Okay. So talk with me. So after Strocks' involvement in the Clinton email investigation, specifically being the one that conducted whatever that interview really was, if we can call it an interview. Yeah. That wasn't sort of the end of his involvement in this whole saga, as his texts continue to show that he continued to be pretty involved in a lot of the direction that the Department of Justice started to go with looking into Trump, and then President-elect Trump, and then President Trump, and the people surrounding him.
I mean, this is their efforts. When I say their efforts, I mean this circle of people, Strzok being at kind of the center of it, not only to steer the election to begin with, but then once to them the unthinkable happens, and there's text messages showing their shock and horror and outrage that President Trump was actually elected. There's all sorts of snarky comments back and forth. Then they feel further motivated. Now we really got to get him. It was bad enough before where we didn't like this guy, but holy cow, now he's been elected, so now we have to go out of our way to destroy him and the people around him. And that's a summary, but that's really what my inference of what their text messages, if you were to summarize it, what they really say.
Yeah. So let's talk about their actions right before the election, and then we'll talk about their actions right after the election, how things kind of got to where they are today. So you're saying that it seemed like Strzok and the people surrounding him were trying to steer the election in a certain way. I'm assuming that you're referring to the so-called Trump dossier and Fusion GPS and that sort of thing.
That's clearly part of the story. Also part of the story is, you can tell by their text messages that they were leaking stories, trying to put a spin on things, because they have this sort of feigned, oh, look, the Wall Street Journal has a story. That got out faster than we thought, or whatever. There's this back and forth about them, and it's clear that they were either the sources of, or they caused the information to be made available. I'm not saying that they necessarily personally did it, but in some way, these stories were sort of orchestrated or timed. And so, based on the text messages, again, it's obvious that they're behind that. So that's in the lead up to the election, but then even afterwards, they start talking about an insurance policy,
right?
Which is really an effort to either discredit or destroy the president. So, what you're led to believe is that their activities form the foundation, along with the Fusion GPS phonied up dossier, that formed the foundation for various FISA warrants being executed for collecting against Mr. Trump, the people around him, the campaign, the early administration, that all these folks were targeted in such a way based upon this kind of phony up information, again, advanced by what looks like Strzok and his circle of people that were working with him.
Right. So we're able to learn a lot about what they were doing, what their mindset was, sort of the seeming sort of anti-Trump bias that they seemed to have in the direction that they were moving things. And then things go radio silent because we don't have a big block of texts,
right.
And that time period is an interesting time period, December 14, 2016 to May 17th, 2017. And if you'll allow me to just kind of tick off a few of the things that happened there. It's right after the 2016 election. You've got the presidential transition. You've got James Comey says that it was during this time period that he briefed Trump on the dossier itself. We had the intelligence community assessment of Russia's involvement in the election come out. We had BuzzFeed publish the salacious and unverified dossier. Inauguration, Strocks interview with Flynn, the firing of Flynn, the firing of Sally Yates, the firing of James Comey, the leaking of Comey's memos, and the launch of the Mueller investigation.
Not very consequential.
Yeah, I mean, just about the sort of the genesis of everything that that everyone's been talking about in 2017, and that still continues to dominate things here in 2018.
And who's at the center of all those events that you just kind of ticked off? Well, if not at the center, certainly right at the margin is Strzok.
Right.
And so I don't believe in coincidences. They simply don't exist. There's all sorts of things that coincidences could be, but they're not coincidences, right? So, how many times have we heard one government agency or another say that they've lost text messages, emails, files? This is a very sad old song. This is the Rose Law Firm billing records magically appearing in the library at the White House. I mean, for years we've had records, disappear and then also magically reappear.
Walk me through that, because this is sort of the same old song over and over again when it comes to what Judicial Watch is involved in.
And in many of these cases, it's actually Judicial Watch that has ended up forcing the issue by litigating it and compelling the government to either find the records or come up with some government official who's going to go under oath and swear that they're not available or destroyed or whatever it is. And even then, we've had times where they've sworn they've given us everything, but we've gone back into court and pressed an issue, and guess what they just found? So, I have kind of the same belief with respect to this 500,000. I've heard that number used, but who knows? Whatever the number is, it's large text messages. And I say that because we've done it over and over again. So whether it's, literally going back to the Clinton White House, right? But more recently, Fast and Furious, the IRS, Hillary Clinton email server, these are all instances where the agency has gone before the court or even the court of a public opinion in respect to the press and said, oh, gee, we just can't find it and we don't know. And there's a technical glitch, of course, lots of glitches. And this is not even addressing the issue of Hillary's people taking hammers to BlackBerries. That's a separate question altogether. This is just purported archival problems, right? No one believes it, and if you do, I think you're either terribly naive or very misinformed. But it's just look. What'll happen is there'll be, I would hope, a concerted effort to recover these text messages. And surprise, surprise, somebody somewhere will, find some little cache of data tucked away and, oh my goodness, look what we found.
Right.
But it's going to require effort, interest, time, money, people, all those sorts of things to get there.
Exactly. And now we are, of course, going to do what we can to get those emails, but in the ones that are available, obviously there's things in those emails that even must have caused concern with Mueller himself, because Strzok ended up joining Mueller's investigation, but then ended up being shuttled off to HR because of what was in these messages, right?
The interesting thing there is that Mueller puts up the pretense of being this sort of even-handed, seasoned professional who's above it all, but he's hired all these sort of pro-Clinton hitmen and hitwomen, to work for him, right? These are not delicate flowers. These are people who've been out there, in some regards, effectively, pursuing criminal cases, but they, for the most part, they lean politically left. And you just have to look at their resumes to see where they came from and who they gave money to. But Mueller still wants to have the air of legitimacy about what he's doing and pretend that it's not partisan and it's not an effort to marginalize and trivialize the president. And so they do the best they can to keep that appearance up.
Yeah. Now, Judicial Watch, we are actually filing a formal lawsuit against the Department of Justice for all of these text messages ourselves.
Yep.
The same sort of thing that we had to do when it came to, like you said, the IRS, Benghazi, Clinton's emails.
It's endless.
And this is something that we're filing now.
What'll be interesting is that we'll be able to do a compare and contrast between what we know has already been produced to Congress versus what they tell us. There's always an interesting sort of friction or tension point there because sometimes we get the same email but different versions of it. So I send an email to you and you send it to your friend, Harry. Well, the version that you sent, has some little remark on it, whatever. The underlying email is the same thing. My note to you says, let's go to lunch Thursday. But then you send it to your friend and you put some snarky remark on it, right? Mm-hmm. That's what's interesting, right? You want to see the dynamics at play there. But the question is, which version got released to who? So did Congress get the full version or just my original email? And that's the kind of, it's attention to detail, but it's very, very important because you could look at an email and it seems like it's kind of like the same thing, and it mostly is. But timing is important. Addressees are important. On the occasions when we've actually gotten metadata, that's also very important because you can see who was BCC'd on a message,
right?
Which can be fascinating, right? Because then you find out, who's really trying to communicate what. So we'll see what comes of it. But
because you're sort of referencing this sort of trickling out of emails
yes.
from here, or texts from there, that because there's all of these different congressional committees that are looking into it in some way, shape, or form. House Intelligence, House Oversight,
and they
Senate.
have their place, and they do what they do, but they have no teeth. I mean, mostly it's just sort of a air movement exercise. They kind of sit there and, I mean, there's merit to it because they get to ask questions, but they're routinely lied to. And even if they are, and someone's held in contempt of Congress, like Eric Holder was, so what? So what you really need, and this is a point of frustration with me, particularly as we see this unending kind of sequence of abusing the investigative system, abusing the judicial system, is that you really need a grand jury and you need indictments. And anything short of that is, it's just frustrating. What I mean? It's important to get the word out, and Congress has their role in doing that. And purportedly they do oversight, but they never cut anyone's funding. So that's always kind of you can watch over someone to death, but if you keep funding them, they're going to do whatever they want. The larger question really is what law enforcement action is going to be taken against people. That's what matters. Because frankly, it's the only thing that gets people's attention.
Yeah, because I mean, Judicial Watch, we were doing these lawsuits, we have litigation, and that's how we sometimes even more effectively than Congress are able to compel this information out through court orders and that sort of thing.
It's civil discovery, right? So we're using the civil litigation process to uncover evidence. And just because we find it doesn't mean it's not useful to others. It's done in a lawful way by court order. The documents that are produced to us are evidence. It's part of the civil discovery process. And so while it's interesting for us because of our mission to educate the public about the operations of government, it doesn't preclude any other government agency from saying, hey, look, that's a pretty important document. We got to use this. And so in our own way, we can lay the foundation for a criminal prosecution, right? The stuff that we gather, the stuff that we produce provides context and perspective for someone who's looking at it not from the civil litigation side, but from the criminal side. And they say, well, look, Judicial Watch got this stuff through FOIA. What are we getting? What does our subpoena look like? Right. And then what's the production? So it's important. It's another piece of the puzzle. Actually, it's more than a piece of the puzzle. It's another sort of block of the foundation. It's a bigger piece, right?
Because you hope that this is building towards...
Yeah, I mean, we'd like to see some kind of justice, right? Instead of these characters running around loose, someone needs to go to jail over this.
Right. Now, let's very briefly talk about sort of connecting some of these other pieces together as we close out here. So we have a brand new lawsuit to get all these Strzok emails.
Yep.
So we can see exactly what's going on during this critical time period. We have an ongoing lawsuits to get to the truth about the Comey memos that were written and leaked and used in Comey's own words to help spur the creation of the special counsel. Right. And we have lawsuits trying to get information on the dossier itself.
Correct.
What the FBI might, what involvement the FBI might have had, if there were communications back and forth between the FBI and Fusion GPS. Tell me sort of how everything that Judicial Watch is doing sort of connects here, and just where you see us going from here in terms of getting to the truth here.
So A moment ago I mentioned the civil discovery process as a means of sort of collecting evidence, collecting information, getting documentary proof in instances where we've been granted not just production of records, but where we've been able to take more discovery, either through written interrogatories or depositions. It's just like I said, it's more sort of blocks for the foundation of this case that needs to be built. It's a case in public education, which is what we do, but it's also a case in sort of civics and public awareness of what the government is doing or not doing. It also kind of holds journalists' feet to the fire, because we're doing a lot of the work that they don't want to do, because frankly, many of them are too lazy to. They'd rather have us, spoon feed them things that they can use. We're doing the work that Congress can take and adapt, and then ultimately, I believe there's sufficient evidence to move for indictments on people, and it's not because of anything that any federal law enforcement agency did. It's all because of our civil discovery. And so our use of the Freedom of Information Act, A, just to ask the question and let people know that we're asking, but B, in front of a federal district court here that orders the production of records, no one else is doing that. The media is not doing it. Congress isn't doing it. We don't know if federal law enforcement is doing it. We don't know if a grand jury is examining it. But I can tell you that when we show up in a court to sue to get records, we are the leading FOIA litigator in the country. The next three groups behind us combined don't equal what we do by volume or by significance. And so I don't know what would happen if we weren't doing what we're doing. I think there'd be a lot of different news in the newspapers. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Well, Chris, I appreciate you coming on and,
sure.
and clearing a lot of this up. Obviously, we're going to have to keep bringing
There's
you
lots
back
more
because
to come.
every week it seems like
Yep.
there's more that's coming out. There's more that we need to investigate, because the more that you sort of learn as you follow along,
Yep.
sort of the more problems and issues that seem to get
You're correct.
discovered. So,
Yep.
Well, thank you very much
Sure.
for joining us. And thank you for following along as well. We are obviously going to keep on this. Be sure to follow along for our latest lawsuits. And until next time, I'm Jerry Dunleavy with Inside Judicial Watch.